Marcus Chen adjusted the neural interface headband one more time, making sure the biosignature dampeners were working properly. The reflection staring back at him from the polished metal wall of his dormitory looked almost alien now. 3 months of genetic therapy had softened his more distinctly human features, and the synthetic skin grafts helped him blend in with the Valiant students at the Centauri Academy of Advanced Sciences. The academy floated in the void between 3 star systems, a massive station that housed the brightest minds from across the galaxy. Students came from dozens of species to study here, but humans were notably absent from the enrollment records. Not because they lacked intelligence, but because the Galactic Council had classified Earth as a developing world, and a polite way of saying humanity was too primitive and violent to participate in higher education. Marcus had spent 2 years planning this infiltration. Every document was forged, every biometric reading carefully altered. According to his false identity, he was Kelarn Thess, a young Valian from the outer colonies whose family had died in a mining accident. The story explained any cultural gaps he might display and gave him a reason to be slightly different from his peers. He walked through the corridors of the academy, marveling at the architecture that seemed to grow rather than be built. Crystalline walls pulsed with soft bioluminescence, and the gravity fields adjusted automatically to accommodate the needs of different species. Overhead, transparent aluminum panels revealed the swirling colors of the Centauri Nebula, a sight that still took his breath away. The morning's classes were typical for a third-year student. Quantum mechanics with Professor Jin, a being whose species existed partially in multiple dimensions. Xenobiology with Dr. Ress, whose lectures about carbon-based life forms always made Marcus nervous. She seemed to study him a bit too intently. And finally, his favorite class, theoretical engineering with Master Korvac. Korvac was old even by draconian standards, his metallic scales dulled with age, but his mind still sharp as a plasma cutter. Today's lesson focused on solving resource limitations in hostile environments, exactly the kind of problem humans had been dealing with for millennia. The scenario is simple, Korvac announced, his voice creating harmonics in the specially designed acoustic chamber. Your colony ship has crashed on a world with limited metallic resources. You have basic tools but no industrial base. How do you build a communications array powerful enough to reach the nearest civilized system? The other students immediately began accessing their neural databases, downloading relevant engineering protocols and established solutions. Marcus watched them work, their minds interfacing directly with the Academy's vast information networks. He had refused the neural implants, claiming a rare Valian condition that made him incompatible with the technology. It was another lie to maintain his cover, but it also meant he had to solve problems the old-fashioned way, with his own mind. While his classmates searched for textbook answers, Marcus thought about humanity's history. He remembered reading about the Apollo missions, how human engineers had jury-rigged solutions with duct tape and spare parts. He thought about the International Space Station, built with technology from a dozen different nations who could barely agree on anything else. Most importantly, he thought about the generation ships that had carried the first human colonists to the stars, vessels that had been launched with technology the Academy would consider laughably primitive. Interesting, Professor Korvac said, his massive head turning toward Marcus. Student Thess seems to be approaching this differently. Would you care to share your thoughts? Marcus stood feeling the weight of attention from 37 pairs of alien eyes. I would start with what we have available locally. Every world has silicon, carbon, and usually iron in some form. Instead of trying to build a single powerful transmitter, I would create a network of smaller relay stations. He moved to the holographic display at the center of the room, his hands shaping the air as he spoke. Each relay would be simple enough to build with basic tools, but together they would create a transmission web that could boost a signal far beyond what any single station could achieve. The key is redundancy. If one station fails, the network routes around it. The display showed his concept. Dozens of simple towers connected by synchronized pulses, each one amplifying and redirecting the signal until it reached escape velocity from the planet's electromagnetic interference. Korvac's eyes narrowed with interest. And if hostile weather destroys several relays? Then you rebuild them. The individual components are simple and interchangeable. A single person could construct a new relay in a few hours using scavenged materials. A Helkin student, her crystalline features sharp with skepticism, spoke up. This approach is inefficient. The Academy databases contain proven solutions that require fewer resources and less time. Marcus met her gaze steadily. The Academy databases assume you have access to Academy-level manufacturing capabilities. This solution works with what you actually have, not what you wish you had. The room fell silent. In galactic civilization, problems were solved by accessing vast networks of accumulated knowledge. The idea of working within limitations, of making do with less than ideal circumstances, was almost foreign to them. These species had developed their technology in comfortable cooperation, sharing resources and knowledge freely. Humanity had learned to innovate out of necessity, to create solutions when solutions didn't exist. Professor Korvac made a note on his personal device. Student Thess presents an unconventional approach. We will test both methodologies in next week's simulation. As the class ended and students filed out, Marcus felt a familiar mixture of pride and anxiety. He was excelling at the Academy, proving that human ingenuity could match any alien intelligence. But each success brought additional attention, and attention was dangerous. He gathered his materials and headed toward the dormitory level, passing through the observation deck, where students often gathered to study beneath the stars. The sight of the Centauri system always reminded him why he was here. Somewhere in that vast expanse of space was Earth, home to 8 billion humans who had no idea that one of their own was walking the halls of the galaxy's most prestigious institution. The stakes were higher than just his personal education. Every human innovation he could learn and bring back, every proof that humanity belonged among the stars, brought his species one step closer to recognition. One step closer to the day when humans wouldn't have to hide who they were to reach for greatness. But first, he had to survive tomorrow's classes without anyone discovering that the student they knew as Kalarn Thess was actually the first human to ever set foot in the Centauri Academy. The simulation chamber hummed with energy as Marcus stood before a massive holographic projection of a barren world. Around him, his classmates were already interfacing with their neural implants, downloading detailed schematics and accessing optimization algorithms. Marcus closed his eyes and tried to visualize the challenge ahead using only his human brain. The crashed colony ship materialized in front of them, a twisted wreck of exotic metals scattered across a red sand desert. Their task was to build the communications array they had theorized about in the previous class. Most students immediately began scanning for the highest grade materials, following optimal efficiency protocols downloaded from the Academy's vast databases. Marcus walked to the wreckage and began examining what others had dismissed as junk. A damaged atmospheric processor here, a broken gravity generator there, twisted hull plating that most students had written off as worthless. He had learned from his grandfather, a mechanic who had kept ancient combustion engines running decades past their intended lifespan. Every piece has value, the old man used to say. You just need to see what it wants to be. While his classmates constructed elaborate single-point transmission towers according to downloaded blueprints, Marcus began gathering seemingly random components. Broken solar collectors became reflective signal boosters. Damaged hull plating was reshaped into parabolic focuses. The twisted remains of support struts became the framework for his relay network. Student Thess, called out Vex, a Helkan whose crystalline body pulsed with disapproval. Your methodology appears chaotic. The optimal solution requires precise calculations and proven engineering principles. Marcus continued working, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. Sometimes the optimal solution isn't available. Sometimes you work with what you have. 3 hours into the simulation, the first test came. A massive electromagnetic storm swept across the virtual landscape, the kind of natural disaster that would cripple most communication systems. The elegant towers built by his classmates began failing one by one, their complex systems overwhelmed by the interference. Marcus's network barely flickered. Each small relay was simple enough to weather the storm, and when 2 units on the edge of the network went dark, the others automatically adjusted their broadcast patterns to compensate. Within minutes, his communication signal was punching through the storm and reaching the distant listening post. Professor Korvac observed from the control booth, his ancient eyes fixed on the human pretending to be Valian. The old Draconian had seen thousands of students pass through his classes, but something about this one nagged at him. The unconventional thinking, the instinctive understanding of limitation and adversity. It reminded him of the old stories his grandfather used to tell about the early days of space exploration. After the simulation ended, Marcus found himself walking alone through the Academy's botanical gardens. The vast chamber contained plant life from 100 worlds, each species carefully maintained in its own environmental bubble. He paused before a section labeled Earth Flora Extinct. Species display, feeling a sharp pang of homesickness as he looked at holographic reconstructions of redwood trees and African savanna grass. The human homeworld was supposed to be quite beautiful, a voice said behind him. Marcus turned to find Dr. Ress, the xenobiology professor, studying him with those unnervingly intelligent eyes. She was Zelthari, a species known for their analytical minds and perfect memory. Her skin had the subtle, color-shifting properties of her people, currently a thoughtful shade of deep blue. I wouldn't know, Marcus replied carefully. The outer colonies don't have much information about extinct civilizations. Extinct is a strong word, Dr. Ress said, moving to stand beside him. The humans were remarkably adaptable. Climate change, resource depletion, even global warfare, they survived it all. Their last confirmed transmission was received just over 50 years ago, shortly before the Galactic Council classified their system as a quarantine zone. Marcus felt his heart racing but kept his expression neutral. Why the quarantine? The humans were evolving too quickly for the Council's comfort. Not physically, technologically, and socially. They went from basic agriculture to interstellar travel in just 10,000 years. Most species take 50 times that long. The Council worried about what kind of neighbors humanity might become if given unrestricted access to galactic civilization. They walked past displays of Martian ice flowers and lunar moss variants. Marcus wondered how many of these extinct Earth plants were actually thriving in hidden colonies scattered across the galaxy. I find their engineering fascinating, Dr. Ress continued. They had a saying, necessity is the mother of invention. Very few species develop that kind of adaptive resourcefulness. Most civilizations advance through steady accumulation of knowledge. Humans seem to innovate best when facing impossible odds. Marcus thought about the generation ships that had carried humans to dozens of worlds beyond the Council's jurisdiction. Ships built with technologies the Academy would consider primitive, crewed by people who had volunteered to spend their entire lives traveling between the stars, so their children might find new homes. Theoretical question, Dr. Ress said, her skin shifting to a pale yellow that indicated curiosity. If you encountered a human today, what would you think? The question hung in the air between them. Marcus felt sweat gathering under his synthetic skin grafts, but he forced himself to meet her gaze. I suppose I would be fascinated. Any species that could challenge the Council's assumptions about technological development would be worth studying. Indeed. Dr. Ress smiled, revealing the sharp teeth characteristic of her species. I should mention that I'm conducting some independent research into human biology, specifically their stress responses and adaptation mechanisms. The data suggests they were remarkably resilient. Marcus nodded, not trusting himself to speak. For instance, she continued, humans produced specific pheromones when under pressure. Very faint, undetectable to most species, but Zelthari olfactory systems are quite sensitive. She paused, her skin shifting to a dangerous crimson. Those pheromones would be completely suppressed by the kind of biosignature dampeners a human might use to disguise themselves among other species. The world seemed to tilt around Marcus. She knew. Somehow this alien professor had figured out what he was. Of course, Dr. Ress added, her coloration returning to neutral blue. Such research is purely theoretical. The Council's quarantine order makes it illegal to interact with humans should any still exist. A professor who discovered evidence of human presence at the Academy would be required to report it immediately. They had reached the end of the garden path. Marcus realized she was giving him a choice, or perhaps a warning. Thank you for the fascinating conversation. Dr. Ress, he said carefully. The pleasure was mine. Student Thess. She turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and congratulations on your performance in Professor Korvac's simulation. Your approach was quite human. As she walked away, Marcus remained frozen among the holographic recreations of his extinct homeworld's plant life. The game had changed. Someone at the Academy knew his secret, and he had no idea whether she was an ally or the beginning of his downfall. But he couldn't stop now. Too much depended on his success. Not just his own future, but potentially the future of his entire species. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new risks, and new opportunities to prove that humanity deserved its place among the stars. He just had to survive long enough to make that proof matter. Marcus spent the next 3 days expecting security forces to drag him from his dormitory at any moment. Every glance from a professor, every whispered conversation between students felt like a potential exposure. But Dr. Ress had not reported him, and life at the academy continued its normal rhythm of lectures, simulations, and research projects. The tension broke during advanced stellar engineering, when Professor Korvac announced a new challenge that would count for 30% of their final grade. The Kepler station disaster, Korvac began, his voice carrying the weight of genuine tragedy. 17 years ago, a research station orbiting a neutron star suffered catastrophic failure. 347 scientists died when their containment systems failed during a pulsar energy collection experiment. Holographic displays showed the doomed station, a delicate structure of crystalline halls and rotating habitat rings that had been torn apart by gravitational forces beyond imagination. Your assignment is to redesign the station to prevent such a disaster. You will work in teams of 4, and you have 2 weeks to present a complete solution. Korvac's ancient eyes swept the classroom. Student Thess, you will be working with students Vex, Tarn, and Rylith. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Vex was the Helkan who had consistently questioned his methods. Tarn was a Gornaxi, whose species specialized in mathematical precision and had little patience for unconventional approaches. Rylith was perhaps the worst choice of all, a Zephyrian whose people were known for their psychic sensitivity and ability to detect deception. As the other teams immediately began downloading station schematics and accessing historical disaster databases, Marcus found himself facing 3 skeptical aliens who clearly considered him the weak link in their group. The optimal approach is obvious, Vex announced, her crystalline features refracting the light in sharp angles. We enhance the containment field, generators with redundant backup systems, and improve the gravitational shielding. Tarn's forearms moved in complex patterns as he interfaced, with multiple data streams simultaneously. Agreed. The mathematical models indicate that doubling the containment strength would have prevented the cascade failure. Rylith said nothing, but Marcus could feel the alien's psychic probes testing the edges of his mind. The mental shields he had trained himself to maintain were holding, but it was exhausting. What do you think, Killarn? Vex's use of his false name carried a hint of mockery. Marcus studied the disaster footage again, watching the station tear itself apart. But instead of focusing on the spectacular failure of the containment systems, he looked at what had survived. The central command module had remained intact for almost 6 minutes after the initial breach. The emergency life pods had functioned perfectly, launching their occupants to safety before the station's destruction. The real tragedy was that there hadn't been enough pods for everyone. I think we're solving the wrong problem, Marcus said quietly. The 3 aliens stared at him. Tarn's mathematical calculations paused midstream. Explain. We're trying to make the station stronger, but what if we made it more flexible? What if, instead of one massive station trying to contain forces that could tear apart a planet, we built something that could separate and survive? Vex's crystalline body flashed with disapproval. That's completely contrary to established engineering principles. The Academy has perfected containment technology over millennia, and it failed, Marcus pointed out. 347 beings died because we put all our trust in systems that couldn't handle the unexpected. For the next week, the team struggled with competing philosophies. Vex, Tarn, and Rylith wanted to build a bigger, stronger version of the failed station. Marcus kept pushing for a modular design that could disconnect and scatter when threatened, like a school of fish evading a predator. The breakthrough came when Marcus suggested they test both approaches in the Academy's disaster simulation chamber. The massive facility could recreate the exact conditions that had destroyed Kepler Station, complete with the unpredictable pulsar emissions and gravitational anomalies that had caused the original disaster. The traditional approach performed exactly as expected. The enhanced containment fields held for 3.7 seconds longer than the original station before catastrophic failure. It was an improvement, but not enough to save lives when the unexpected happened. Marcus's modular design looked fragile in comparison, Instead of one massive structure, it consisted of dozens of smaller platforms connected by flexible energy conduits and emergency separation systems. When the simulation began, the aliens in the observation booth shook their heads in apparent disappointment. Then the pulsar hiccuped, an unpredictable energy spike that hadn't been part of the original disaster. The kind of random event that no amount of planning could anticipate. The modular station immediately began disconnecting. Individual platforms shot away from the danger zone like spores from a pod, their emergency systems flawlessly executing separation procedures. Some modules were lost to the gravitational anomalies, but within minutes, 60% of the station had survived and was already beginning to reconnect in a safer configuration. The observation booth fell silent. Even Professor Korvac seemed stunned by the results. "How did you know to program those separation sequences?" Tarn asked, his mathematical mind struggling to understand how Marcus had anticipated a scenario that wasn't in any database. Marcus thought about Earth's history of natural disasters. Earthquakes that taught humans to build flexible structures instead of rigid ones. Hurricanes that showed the value of evacuation over resistance. Tsunamis that proved that sometimes the best defense was to get out of the way. "You plan for what you can't plan for," he said. "You assume something will go wrong that nobody thought of, and you design systems that can survive being wrong." After the demonstration, Rylith approached him privately. The psychic alien's mental probes had been particularly intense during the presentation, and Marcus had felt them pressing against his defenses. "Your mind is very well shielded." "Kellarn," Rylith said, using his false name with deliberate emphasis. "Most Valians don't have that kind of mental discipline." Marcus met the alien's gaze steadily. "The outer colonies can be dangerous places. You learn to protect yourself." "Indeed." Rylith's expression was unreadable. "I find your thought patterns fascinating. Very adaptive, very survival-oriented. As if your species had spent millennia learning to overcome impossible odds." Another one who suspected. Marcus realized that his very successes were drawing attention from exactly the beings most capable of seeing through his disguise. "There's something else," Rylith continued. "During the simulation, when the unexpected pulsar spike occurred, I felt your emotional response. Not fear or confusion, but something else. Recognition. As if you had been expecting the unexpected." Marcus said nothing. What could he say? That humans had learned to expect the unexpected because their history was written in survival stories? That every human innovation had come from someone looking at impossible odds and refusing to give up? "I will not report what I suspect," Rylith said finally, "but others are beginning to notice. Your methods, your instincts, they're drawing attention from beings far more dangerous than curious professors." That night, Marcus stood in his dormitory looking out at the stars, wondering how much longer his deception could last. Dr. Ress knew his secret. Rylith suspected it. And somewhere in the Academy's vast network of corridors and chambers, other eyes might be watching. Other minds putting together the pieces that would reveal humanity's first ambassador to the stars. But he couldn't quit now. Every day at the Academy brought new knowledge, new proof that humans could not only compete with the galaxy's best minds, but could offer unique perspectives that might benefit all species. The question was whether he could survive long enough to make that case to the beings who mattered. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests and new opportunities to prove that humanity deserved a place among the stars. He just had to stay hidden a little longer. The alarms began screaming at 0347 Standard Academy time. Marcus jolted awake in his dormitory as emergency lighting bathed the corridors in pulsing red. Through his window he could see the reason for the alert. A massive debris field was approaching the station. The remains of what looked like a destroyed cargo vessel, spreading across space like a deadly cloud. Over the Academy's communication system, Director Voss's voice crackled with barely controlled panic. "All students report to designated safe areas immediately. This is not a drill. A freight hauler has suffered catastrophic explosive decompression in our vicinity. Debris impact is imminent." Marcus pulled on his emergency suit and rushed into the corridor, joining streams of alien students heading for the reinforced sections of the station. But as he moved with the crowd, his engineer's mind was already analyzing the situation. The Academy's defensive systems were designed for small meteorites and cosmic dust, not for chunks of starship hull traveling at relativistic speeds. Through the transparent aluminum panels, He could see the debris cloud growing larger. The largest pieces were the size of small buildings, tumbling end over end as they approached. The Academy's point defense systems were already firing, bright lances of energy reaching out to vaporize the smaller fragments. But there were too many pieces, and some were too large for the weapons to stop completely. In the central safe area, hundreds of students huddled together while professors tried to maintain order. Marcus found his team from the Stellar Engineering Project, Vex's crystalline form flickering with nervous energy, Tarn calculating impact probabilities with his multiple arms, and Rylith maintaining an almost supernatural calm. "The defensive grid will stop most of it," Vex said, but her voice carried uncertainty. Tarn's calculations painted a grimmer picture. 17 major impacts likely to penetrate the outer hull. Probability of critical system damage, 63%. As if responding to his words, a tremendous crash shook the entire station. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut as atmosphere rushed out through a breach somewhere in the educational wing. The lights flickered, and the artificial gravity wavered for terrifying seconds. Director Voss's voice returned, tight with stress. "We have multiple hull breaches. All students remain in safe areas while repair teams assess the damage." But Marcus was no longer listening to the announcement. He was studying the structural diagrams on his handheld device, tracing power conduits and life support systems. The Academy was hurt and more debris was still incoming. "I need to check something," he told his teammates, moving toward the exit of the safe area. "Student Thess, you cannot leave." Professor Korvac appeared beside him, the old draconian scales dark with concern. "The corridors are not safe. The power coupling junction in section C7, Marcus said, pointing to his device. "If that gets hit, we'll lose atmospheric processors for the entire residential district. 3,000 students could suffocate before repair teams can restore systems." Korvac's ancient eyes studied the display. "The repair teams will handle it." "The repair teams are dealing with 17 other breaches," Marcus replied. "And section C7 isn't classified as critical infrastructure because the Academy's designers never planned for this kind of damage. By the time they realize the danger, it'll be too late." Another impact shook the station. This time the lights went out completely for several seconds before emergency power kicked in. "I know how to reroute the power systems," Marcus continued. "I've been studying the Academy's infrastructure for months." He didn't mention that he'd been mapping the station as part of his infiltration planning. "Someone needs to get to that junction and implement manual bypass protocols before the next major impact." Korvac was quiet for a long moment. Around them, other students pressed closer to the walls as another wave of debris peppered the outer hull. "If you go alone," the professor said finally. "I cannot risk other students for what may be an unnecessary mission." Marcus nodded and headed for the emergency airlock. Behind him, he heard Rylith's voice. "I'll go with him." "Rylith, no," Tarn protested. "The mathematical probability of survival. Mathematics didn't account for his solution to the Kepler station problem," the psychic alien replied calmly. "Sometimes you have to trust instincts that can't be calculated." The corridors outside the safe area were a nightmare of twisted metal and escaping atmosphere. Emergency force fields flickered at breach points, holding back the vacuum of space through sheer technological determination. Marcus led the way, following maintenance shafts and service tunnels that most students didn't even know existed. "How do you know these passages so well?" Rylith asked as they crawled through a narrow conduit filled with fiber optic cables. "I like to explore," Marcus replied, which was technically true. He'd spent months mapping every access route in case he needed to escape quickly. They reached section C7 just as another massive impact rocked the station. This time the damage was close enough to see. A gaping hole in the outer hull that had been sealed by an emergency bulkhead. But the power coupling junction was intact, though sparks were flying from damaged conduits nearby. Marcus opened the maintenance panel and stared at the complex array of connections inside. This was Academy-level technology, far more advanced than anything humans had officially developed. But underneath the exotic materials and alien engineering principles, it was still just a power distribution system. Electricity followed the same laws whether you were on Earth or floating between the stars. "I need to reroute power from the secondary grid to compensate for the damaged primary feeds," Marcus explained, his hands already moving among the connections. "The atmospheric processors will stay online, but we'll lose some redundancy." Rylith watched him work, and Marcus could feel those psychic probes pressing against his mental defenses again. Your knowledge of Academy systems is remarkable for someone from the outer colonies. Engineering is engineering, Marcus replied, focusing on the delicate work. One wrong connection could overload the entire power grid. The principles don't change just because the technology gets more advanced. As he worked, Marcus found himself thinking about the International Space Station again. Humans had kept that rickety assemblage of modules functioning for decades, patching problems with whatever materials they could find. The Academy systems were more elegant, but they followed the same basic rules. Keep the air flowing, keep the power running. Keep the systems that kept people alive working no matter what. The final connection clicked into place just as another impact sent vibrations through the station's superstructure. Marcus held his breath as the power flow stabilized, and the atmospheric processors hummed back to full efficiency. Remarkable, Rylith said quietly. You solved that as if you had been working with Academy systems your entire life. Marcus started to reply, then stopped. Through the damaged hull plating, he could see something that made his blood freeze. One more piece of debris was heading straight for them. A chunk of starship engine casing the size of a small building. And it was going to hit Section C7 directly. We need to go, he said urgently. Now. But as they turned to leave, the maintenance shaft they had crawled through groaned and collapsed. Twisted metal blocked their escape route. They were trapped, with a building-sized piece of debris bearing down on their location. Marcus looked around desperately, his engineer's mind racing through possibilities. The atmospheric processors were working, but they wouldn't matter if the entire section was crushed. The emergency bulkheads might hold, but probably not against that much mass moving at that speed. Can you use your psychic abilities to call for help? He asked Rylith. I am trying, but the debris impacts are creating too much electromagnetic interference. I cannot reach beyond this section. Marcus stared at the approaching doom through the transparent aluminum panels. In a few minutes he would be dead, and with him would die humanity's first chance to prove they belonged among the stars. Unless... He looked at the power coupling junction he had just repaired. Academy technology, far beyond anything humans were supposed to understand. But power was power and energy was energy, and sometimes the most advanced solution was to use that energy in the simplest possible way. Rylith, he said, how much psychic interference can you handle if I give you a lot more power to work with? Rylith's psychic abilities were impressive under normal circumstances, but the electromagnetic chaos created by the debris impacts had reduced their range to barely 50 meters. Marcus stared at the power coupling junction, his mind racing through calculations that would have made Tarn proud. I can boost your psychic transmission by feeding power directly into your neural pathways, Marcus explained, already pulling access panels off the wall. But it's going to hurt, and there's a chance it could damage your nervous system permanently. The approaching debris had grown large enough to block out the stars. Impact in less than 2 minutes. That's impossible, Rylith said. Zephyrian neurology isn't compatible with direct power feeds. The energy differential would kill you, yes, Marcus interrupted, his hands flying over the control systems. Unless we modulate the frequency to match your brain's natural electrical patterns. I need you to establish a baseline psychic transmission. Anything will do, so I can read the energy signature. Rylith hesitated for only a moment before sending out a focused mental call. Marcus watched the power fluctuations on his display, memorizing the wavelength patterns. Zephyrian psychic abilities operated on a frequency similar to human theta brainwaves, but with harmonic overtones that suggested their neural structure was far more complex. This is madness, Rylith said, but they moved closer to the power coupling anyway. No species would attempt such a dangerous modification. Marcus was already rerouting power conduits, bypassing safety protocols that the Academy's designers had considered inviolable. My species has a saying, desperate times call for desperate measures. Your species? Marcus froze, realizing his slip. Through the viewport, the debris filled the entire view now, a wall of twisted metal bearing down on them. No time for careful word choice, human, he said simply, not looking up from his work. I'm human. Rylith was quiet for a moment. I suspected as much. Your thought patterns, your approach to problems. Nothing like any Valian I've encountered. Marcus finished the power modifications and looked up at his teammate. Are you going to report me? That depends. Are you going to save our lives first? 1 minute to impact. Marcus activated the modified power feed and immediately felt the hair on his arm stand up from the electrical field. Put your hands on the coupling points. When I energize the system, you'll have about 30 seconds of boosted transmission range before the power overload becomes dangerous. Rylith positioned themselves at the coupling junction. What message should I send? Marcus thought about it. The Academy's emergency protocols called for evacuating damaged sections, not defending them. But sometimes the best defense was a good offense. Tell them to fire the main deflector array at these coordinates, Marcus said, feeding numbers into his handheld device. Not at the debris, at the space directly in front of it. That makes no sense. The deflector array is designed to push objects away from the station, not destroy them. I'm not trying to destroy it. I'm trying to change its vector just enough to miss us. Marcus's fingers flew over the controls. The debris is following a ballistic trajectory. Even a small change in velocity will alter its path significantly. 20 seconds to impact. Marcus activated the power boost. The effect on Rylith was immediate and dramatic. Their entire body began glowing with psychic energy as raw power flooded their neural pathways. Marcus could feel the aliens' mental scream as their consciousness expanded beyond anything their species had ever experienced. But it worked. Rylith's boosted psychic transmission cut through the electromagnetic interference like a plasma torch through tissue paper, reaching all the way to the Academy's command center with crystal clarity. Message transmitted, Rylith gasped, their body convulsing from the power overload. They're firing deflectors now. Marcus could see the effect through the viewport, invisible force beams reaching out to touch empty space directly in the path of the approaching debris. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then gradually, the massive chunk of Starship Hull began to shift its trajectory. It wasn't much, maybe a degree or two of deviation. But at the distances involved, that tiny change was enough. The debris swept past Section C7 with less than 50 meters to spare, close enough that Marcus could make out individual rivet patterns on the twisted hull plates. Marcus immediately shut down the power boost, but the damage to Rylith was already done. The alien collapsed, their psychic abilities completely burned out from the overload. Rylith. Marcus caught them as they fell. Can you hear me? Still alive, the alien whispered. But I think my psychic abilities are gone permanently. Marcus felt a stab of guilt. In saving both their lives, he had cost Rylith the abilities that defined their species. I'm sorry. I should have found another way. You found the only way, Rylith replied weakly, and you revealed your secret to do it. Rescue teams found them an hour later after cutting through the debris that had blocked their escape route. Marcus helped carry the injured Rylith to the medical bay, where Zephyrian specialists confirmed what they both already knew. The psychic centers in Rylith's brain had been permanently damaged by the power overload. But they were alive, and so were the 3,000 students whose atmospheric processors Marcus had saved. News of the humans' actions spread through the Academy faster than Marcus could have imagined. Dr. Ress found him in the medical bay waiting area, her skin color cycling through several shades of what he now recognized as amazement. So it's true, she said, settling into the chair beside him. You really are human. Marcus nodded, too exhausted to maintain the pretense any longer. How long have you known? Since your second week here. Your stress pheromones were completely wrong for a Valian, and your approach to problems was unlike anything I'd seen before. She paused. I've been documenting everything. Your problem-solving methods, your adaptability, your willingness to take risks that other species would consider suicidal. Are you going to turn me in? Dr. Ress was quiet for a long moment. The Galactic Council quarantined Earth because they feared what humanity might become. After watching you for months, I think they were right to be afraid. But not for the reasons they think. She leaned forward, her expression intense. You don't just think outside conventional parameters. You think outside the entire framework that other species use to approach problems. You assume that the normal way of doing things might not work, so you prepare alternatives that the rest of us never consider. That's just human nature, Marcus said. We've had to adapt to survive. Exactly. And that's what makes humanity dangerous to the Council's way of thinking. They've built galactic civilization on the assumption that there are correct solutions to problems, optimal approaches that can be calculated and implemented. Humans seem to operate on the assumption that there might not be a correct solution. so you need to be ready to improvise. Through the medical bay windows, Marcus could see repair crews working to patch the damage from the debris strike. The Academy would survive, stronger for having been tested. What happens now? He asked. Now, Dr. Ress said, we find out whether the Academy is ready to learn from a species that the Council decided wasn't ready to learn from us. But even as she spoke, Marcus could see security personnel moving through the corridors. Word of his true identity was spreading, and not everyone at the Academy would be as understanding as Dr. Ress and Rylith. The real test was just beginning. The hearing convened in the Academy's Grand Assembly Chamber, exactly 72 hours after Marcus's identity was exposed. The vast circular room could hold representatives from every member species of the Galactic Council, though today only a fraction of the seats were occupied. Still, the beings present represented some of the most powerful voices in galactic civilization. Marcus sat at the defendant's table, no longer bothering with the biosignature dampeners that had hidden his human features. His naturally darker skin and distinctive bone structure marked him clearly as a member of the quarantined species. Beside him sat Dr. Ress, who had volunteered to serve as his advocate, despite the potential damage to her own career. Across the chamber, Director Voss presided over the proceedings with barely concealed nervousness. The Academy had never dealt with a situation like this, a member of a quarantined species infiltrating their most prestigious institution. Student Marcus Chen, Voss said, his voice echoing in the chamber's acoustic enhancers. You stand accused of violating Galactic Council Resolution 7742, which prohibits contact between quarantined species and the galactic community. How do you respond to these charges? Marcus rose to his feet. I acknowledge that I am human, and that I enrolled at this academy under false credentials. I do not dispute the facts of the case. A murmur ran through the gallery where academy students and faculty had gathered to observe. Marcus could see Vex, Tarn, and many of his classmates watching with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright fear. However, Marcus continued, I would like to speak about why I took these actions and what my time at the Academy has revealed about the assumptions underlying the quarantine order. Counselor Thex, a draconian whose scales were so ancient they had turned nearly white, leaned forward in his judgment seat. The quarantine exists for the protection of galactic civilization. Humanity's aggressive expansion and unpredictable technological development posed a clear threat to established order. With respect, Counselor, Dr. Ress interjected, rising from her seat, I have spent months observing Mr. Chen's behavior and methods. The qualities that make humanity seem dangerous are actually qualities that galactic civilization desperately needs. She activated a holographic display showing data from Marcus's various assignments and projects. In every simulation, every problem-solving exercise, every crisis situation, Mr. Chen has demonstrated an ability to find solutions that our traditional approaches missed entirely. The display showed the Kepler station redesign, with its modular architecture that had outperformed conventional engineering. It showed the debris crisis, where Marcus's unconventional use of the deflector array had saved thousands of lives. The human approach to problems is fundamentally different from our own, Dr. Ress continued. Where we seek optimal solutions based on accumulated knowledge, humans prepare for the possibility that optimal solutions might not exist. This makes them incredibly valuable partners in addressing challenges that our traditional methods cannot handle. Counselor Zenth, whose Helkan crystalline structure reflected the chamber's lights in sharp patterns, spoke with obvious skepticism. These examples prove nothing. One individual's successes do not justify exposing galactic civilization to an unpredictable species. But they do suggest that our understanding of humanity is incomplete, Professor Korvac said. Rising from the faculty section, the old draconian commanded respect even among council members. I have taught at this academy for 3 centuries. In that time, I have seen brilliant minds from dozens of species tackle impossible problems. But I have never seen anyone approach challenges the way Mr. Chen does. Korvac gestured to the holographic display. He doesn't just solve problems. He solves problems that we didn't know existed. The atmospheric processor backup in Section C7 was not considered critical infrastructure. Yet Mr. Chen identified it as a potential failure point during the debris crisis. His modular approach to the Kepler station addressed vulnerabilities that our design protocols had overlooked entirely. Because humans are paranoid, Counselor Thex growled. They assume everything will go wrong because their species developed in an environment of constant conflict and resource scarcity. Exactly, Marcus said, seizing the opening. And that paranoia, that assumption that things will go wrong, is what makes us valuable. Every human innovation has come from someone looking at a system and asking, what happens when this fails? He gestured to the academy around them. This station is a marvel of engineering, but it was designed by species who had the luxury of stable environments and cooperative development. When something truly unexpected happened, like the debris field, your traditional approaches weren't enough. Marcus activated his own display, showing footage from the recent crisis. Dr. Ress said, I think outside conventional parameters, but that's not quite right. Humans think inside the parameters of a universe that doesn't care about our survival. We assume that the universe is trying to kill us, so we prepare accordingly. Rylith appeared in the gallery, moving slowly but steadily despite their injuries. The Zephyrian made their way to the speaking area, and Director Voss recognized them. Counselors, Rylith said, their voice carrying clearly despite their weakened state. I lost my psychic abilities helping Mr. Chen save this station. According to my species' traditions, I am no longer truly Zephyrian, but I have gained something else. A perspective that I would not trade for all the psychic power in the galaxy. Rylith looked directly at Marcus. Humans don't just prepare for failure, they prepare to succeed despite failure. When our escape route was blocked and death seemed certain, Mr. Chen didn't accept defeat. He found a way to turn the Academy's own systems into a weapon against the approaching debris. It was dangerous, possibly suicidal, but it worked. And that is precisely why humanity is dangerous, Counselor Zenth snapped. They take unacceptable risks. No, Rylith interrupted. They take necessary risks that the rest of us are too comfortable to consider. The quarantine order assumes that humanity's aggressive tendencies make them unsuitable for galactic civilization. But what if those tendencies are exactly what galactic civilization needs to face the challenges ahead? Dr. Ress reactivated the data display. I have been conducting unauthorized research into human development patterns. The species that the Council fears for their rapid technological advancement are the same. Species whose colonies have survived in environments that would kill any other galactic civilization. New images appeared. Human settlements on worlds with crushing gravity, in the hearts of asteroid fields, even orbiting neutron stars, places where other species had never dared to establish permanent habitation. The humans didn't spread across the galaxy despite the quarantine, Dr. Ress continued. They spread because of it. Cut off from galactic civilization, they were forced to develop their own solutions to impossible problems, and they succeeded. Marcus felt a surge of pride as he looked at the images of human achievement. His people had not just survived in exile, they had thrived, pushing the boundaries of what was considered possible. Director Voss called for a recess while the council members conferred. As the formal session broke up, Marcus found himself surrounded by students and faculty who had never spoken to him before. Some were curious, others fearful, but all seemed to recognize that something fundamental had changed at the Academy. Whatever happens, Dr. Ress said quietly, you've accomplished something remarkable here. You've forced the Council to reconsider assumptions they've held for 50 years. Marcus nodded, but his attention was focused on the Council members who were still deep in discussion. Tomorrow they would render their verdict, and with it would come the future of human-galactic relations. The question was whether the galaxy was ready to embrace the chaos and innovation that humanity represented, or whether they would choose the safety of continued isolation. For the first time since arriving at the Academy, Marcus felt that the outcome was truly beyond his control. But that was okay. Humans had learned long ago how to succeed despite uncertainty. The Council reconvened at dawn Academy time. Marcus had spent the night staring out at the stars, wondering if this would be his last view of the galaxy from a place of learning rather than exile. The 3 Council members took their positions with expressions that revealed nothing of their decision. Director Voss called the session to order, his voice carrying the weight of history. After extensive deliberation, the Council has reached a decision regarding the case of Marcus Chen and the broader question of humanity's place in galactic civilization. Marcus stood, feeling the eyes of everyone in the chamber focused on him. In the gallery, he could see Dr. Ress, Professor Korvac, Rylith, and dozens of students whose lives had been touched by his presence at the academy. The evidence presented, Counselor Thex began, confirms that Mr. Chen violated the quarantine order through deliberate deception. Under normal circumstances, this would result in immediate deportation and strengthening of quarantine protocols. Marcus felt his heart sink, but the ancient draconian continued. However, the circumstances surrounding this case are far from normal. Mr. Chen's actions during the debris crisis saved thousands of lives through methods that our own protocols had not anticipated. More significantly, his academic performance has demonstrated capabilities that challenge our fundamental assumptions about quarantined species. Counselor Zenth's crystalline form flickered with what Marcus had learned to recognize as deep thought. The Helkin delegation has always advocated for strict adherence to quarantine protocols. We believed that maintaining separation was essential for galactic stability. She paused, her reflective surface showing rainbow patterns. But the modular station design that Mr. Chen developed has applications beyond simple disaster scenarios. Our engineering teams have analyzed his approach and identified 17 different applications for Helkin crystal mining operations, including methods that could revolutionize our industry. The third council member, a being Marcus had never seen before, spoke for the first time. Their species was unknown to him, but their voice carried the authority of vast age. The Vorthak Collective has observed galactic civilization for longer than most species have existed, they said. We have seen many promising civilizations rise and fall, often because they became too comfortable with success and lost the ability to adapt to new challenges. They gestured to the holographic displays still showing human colonies in impossible locations. The humans represent something we have not seen in millennia, a species that has learned to thrive on adversity rather than be diminished by it. This quality may be exactly what galactic civilization needs as we face an uncertain future. Director Voss stepped forward. The council has reached a unanimous decision. Mr. Chen, you are hereby granted full student status at the Centauri Academy, with all privileges and responsibilities thereof. Furthermore, the quarantine order regarding humanity is hereby modified to allow for limited cultural and educational exchange. The chamber erupted in discussion. Some voices carried excitement, others concern, but all seemed to recognize the historic nature of the decision. But the Vorthak representative wasn't finished. There is more. Recent deep space monitoring has detected signs of an extragalactic threat, a force that appears to consume entire star systems. Traditional galactic civilization has no framework for addressing challenges of this magnitude. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. An extragalactic threat was beyond anything humanity had faced. But it was also exactly the kind of impossible challenge that brought out the best in his species. The Council hereby requests that humanity participate in a joint task, forced to assess and prepare for this potential threat. Your species' unique approach to problem-solving may be crucial to galactic survival. Dr. Ress was on her feet, her skin cycling through colors Marcus had never seen before. This is unprecedented. You're not just ending the quarantine, you're asking humanity to help defend the galaxy. Because they are the only species we know who might succeed where conventional approaches would fail, Professor Korvac said, his ancient voice carrying certainty. Mr. Chen has proven that humans don't just survive impossible situations, they find ways to win them. As the session ended and the chamber began to empty, Marcus found himself surrounded by beings who had gone from viewing him as a curiosity to seeing him as humanity's first true ambassador to the stars. Rylith approached, still moving carefully but with a smile on their alien features. So what happens now, human? Marcus looked out at the stars visible through the chamber's massive windows. Somewhere out there, human colonies were going about their daily lives, unaware that their exile had just ended. Somewhere else, an unimaginable threat was approaching that would challenge everything the galaxy had built. Now, Marcus said, we prove that humanity deserves its place among the stars, and then we prove that we can help keep those stars safe. 6 months later, the first human delegation arrived at the Academy, aboard a ship that made even the Galactic Council members stop and stare. It was clearly human in design, angular, practical, built for function over beauty, but it was also obviously advanced beyond anything the Council had expected from a quarantined species. Marcus stood in the docking bay as the airlock opened. watching as 30 human scientists, engineers, and explorers stepped into galactic civilization for the first time in 50 years. Their leader was a woman about his own age, her eyes bright with the same determination that had driven him to attempt the impossible. "Dr. Sarah Okafor," she said, extending her hand in the ancient human greeting. "Earth Colonial Administration. I understand we have a galaxy to save?" Marcus smiled, taking her hand. "We've got some ideas about that, and I think you're going to like the workshop space they've given us." As the human delegation was welcomed by Academy staff and council representatives, Marcus reflected on how much had changed. The Academy now had a Department of Adaptive Engineering, dedicated to studying and teaching human problem-solving methods. The modular station design had been implemented across 36 facilities, and most importantly, the galaxy had begun to understand that diversity of thought was not a threat to be contained, but a strength to be embraced. The extragalactic threat was still out there, still approaching, but for the first time in his life, Marcus felt confident that whatever was coming, the galaxy would be ready for it. After all, they had humanity on their side now, and humans had a long history of finding ways to win impossible fights. Professor Korvac found Marcus in the observation deck later that evening, watching as the human ship docked alongside vessels from a dozen other species. "Any regrets?" the old Draconian asked. Marcus thought about it. "Just one. I wish I could have brought more of my people with me from the beginning." "Perhaps," Korvac said, "but then we might not have been ready to truly see what humanity had to offer. Sometimes the greatest revelations come not from what we expect, but from what surprises us." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars and the future unfold before them. In the distance, Marcus could see construction beginning on the new joint research facility, where human and alien minds would work together to face whatever challenges the universe might throw at them. It was, he thought, exactly the kind of impossible project that humans excelled at, and this time, they wouldn't have to face it alone.